Greetings, friends. This lecture is on the operation of the biblical calendar, specifically on the intercalation of the year. For those of you who do not know, intercalation means adding a 13th month after 1 or 2 years with 12 months. First, I will explain why a 13th month is sometimes required in the months of the year. The biblical calendar tracks the months of the year according to the moon. The familiar January through December Roman calendar does not. A biblical month lasts 29 or 30 days. The biblical calendar keeps each month in its proper season. Therefore, the biblical months have to be coordinated with the year according to the sun. The cycle of days, called the year, lasts 365 or 366 days, and the cycle of the month lasts 29 or 30 days. An average month lasts 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, 2.8 seconds. So that 12 lunar months commonly make 354 days, or 355 days. At the extremes, the difference between 12 months and a year varies from 10 to 12 days. The average shortfall is 10.87 days and is commonly rounded up to 11 days. The reason a 13th month is needed about every 3 years is because the difference accumulates up to almost 33 days, just over a month. Sometimes intercalation is needed after 2 years because the 3-year deficit is actually more than a month. The 11-day shortfall between 12 months by the moon and the 12 familiar months of the Roman calendar are accounted for in the excess number of days in the Roman months. On average, a Roman month has about 1 day more each month than a month by the moon. The averages help explain why intercalation is needed. But there is no such thing as a month or year by the averages. The number of days according to the biblical months and years are always a whole number, 29 or 30 days for the month, 365 or 366 days for the year. The average month length is computed by taking many actual months of 29 or 30 days, and then adding up the total number of days, and then dividing by the total number of months. The same procedure is used to find the average year length. The number of days in many years of 365 or 366 days are added up. Then the total is divided by the number of years. The results of these averages approach their modern values as the number of months or years used in the computation increases. But there is no such thing as a year or month with the average number of days. The average numbers are abstractions. In the biblical calendar, any fraction of a day is counted with a whole day. For this reason, the actual lunar year is 10, 11, or 12 days shorter than the actual solar year. Think of this as a 365-yard race. The sun has a stride of 365 yards in most years, and 12 moons have a stride of 354 yards most of the time. When the sun takes one stride, then the moon will end up 11 yards behind the sun. After the sun takes 2 strides, the moon is behind 22 yards. And after 3 sun strides, the moon is behind 33 yards, or 33 days in this analogy. There is a third runner called the seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. The seasons always keep up with the sun, and not the moon. In reality, the sun causes the seasons, because the sun is responsible for the varying length of the day, between 9 and 16 hours where we live, and 10 and 14 hours in the Holy City. If the cycle of months always started again at the first after 12 months, then the first month would wander through all the seasons of the year. A perfect example of this kind of wandering calendar is the Islamic calendar. The Islamic religious calendar never adds a 13th month. So, all the sacred days of Islam, including their fasting month, Ramadan, continuously cycle through all the seasons of the year, every 33 years or so. The biblical calendar does not work that way. The biblical first month obviously must not fall behind the seasons, like a calendar that fails to use a 13th month. All the biblical holy days are clearly linked to the seasons of the year. Passover to spring, Shavuot to late spring, and Tabernacles to the end of the harvest. Logically, some lunar years must have 13 months, and some must have 12 in order for the first month to stay with its seasons. Scripture never says a lunar year has only 12 months, nor does it deny the possibility of a 13-month lunar year. The logic of determining months by the moon and the year by the sun leads to one conclusion. Some lunar years have 12 and some lunar years have 13 months. The faithful have been given minds to comprehend this logic. The Scripture does not explicitly spell it out, which gives us the opportunity to test the mental resources the Almighty has given us. Man is created in the image of the Most High. An awesome responsibility is upon man to use his mind properly. Solomon did have a rotating 12-month administrative period for his taxes. There was no 13th month, so-called, in this system, because its purpose was to be fair to all those who had to provide food for his court, or serve in some capacity. The difficulty of providing food varied according to the season and the feast days. So also the difficulty of providing services. So, to be fair, the months of this administrative year were allowed to wander the seasons. In like manner, the 24 weeks for the priestly rotations were not intercalated to make them even with a year. This was to be fair to all the priests, to let them serve in every season. But the Scripture prescribes Passover to be in the spring season, the season of the fresh grain ear, Aviv. Logically, to keep it in place, a 13-month year is required every 2 or 3 years. So, the biblical calendar is intercalated. There is nothing strange about this requirement. In the ancient Near East, the adding of an extra month to a 12-month year was a common practice. It was done by the Ebalites, the third dynasty of contemporary with Abraham, also Larsa, Izan, and Amorite Babylon. The Assyrians also added an extra month, when needed, and so also, likewise, the Babylonians, the Persians, and the Greeks. Even the Egyptians had a lunar calendar used for religious purposes, besides their more commonly known civil calendar, with 365 days. And most scholars have concluded that in Egypt they also added an extra month every 2 or 3 years. Also, the Romans, before the Julian calendar was introduced, used new moons and a 13th month to keep the first month in the spring. Even this day, a lunar calendar beginning in the spring and using a 13th month to keep it there is used in China. There are intercalated lunar calendars all over the world throughout history. Even a Germanic calendar is known with an extra month, just as the need to work, eat, and sleep is common to all nations, so the intercalation of the year with an extra month was taken for granted in ancient times. It is generally the case with the spread of the more recent Roman calendar, adopted for everyday use by the Church, that these older calendars are being replaced. Older national calendars have been supplanted by Rome, but those replaced calendars were more closely connected to practices handed down from Noah. And ever since then, mankind has made progress away from the laws of the Creator, so much so that the wicked now want to deny fundamental human biology, to escape from the limits placed on humankind by the Creator. So modern man has disconnected himself from keeping time by the actual cycles of the moon. Both Christianity and Judaism recognize the need for some years to have 13 months. The date of Easter is always fixed using an ecclesiastical calendar that uses lunar months. And the Church's calendar calculates a 13th month every 2 or 3 years. The reason for this 13th month is that the Church's calendar calculations for Easter still retain a memory of the biblical calendar. And finally, a 13th month is added every 2 or 3 years in the common Jewish calendar. So, adding a 13th month has a long history. Now I will turn this lecture to the method of adding the 13th month. The method is preserved in the foundational ideas of the Jewish calendar and is also stated in Scripture. We should examine the traditional Jewish calendar and the Scripture together to see what is affirmed by Scripture and what is contradicted by Scripture. Seeing the differences will help us. The Rabbinic calendar's lack of correspondence with the biblical calendar is admitted in all its sources and by the most studious of its practitioners. The reason given for its continuance is always the traditional unity argument. Advocates of the Rabbinic calendar do not oppose the operation of the biblical calendar. They generally admit it. They just consider following the tradition more important than restoring it, often saying only a new Sanhedrin can repair it. It is my opinion, however, that it will not be repaired nationally until enough of the faithful actually adopt the biblical observance by making their own observances follow the biblical calendar. What stands in the way is the inertia of the rabbinic authority and tradition. I believe generally only a knowledge of Messiah Yeshua can give the faithful the fortitude necessary to withstand the criticism of differing with the majority. The Rabbinical calendar was formally instituted in the year AD 358 to 359 by Hillel II, but this calendar did not reach its final form until the 10th century. Hillel II took this action because the Byzantine Romans made it illegal for messengers to announce the new moons, as they were observed in Israel. What Hillel published was a 19-year cycle, and probably without the postponements and refinements found in the later 10th century version, which is today's Rabbinic calendar. The rabbis admit this calendar was supposed to be a temporary measure, as a response to Roman suppression of the Jewish calendar. They all admit the new moons were visually sighted, and that the year is supposed to be intercalated on the basis of the beginning moment of 16 Aviv, which begins at sunset at the end of the 15th day. There are 4 major problems with the current rabbinic calendar. The first is that the calculations are based on the conjunction of the moon rather than the visible new moon. The Jewish sources upheld by the rabbis reveal that new moons were determined by visible sighting in the Second Temple period. The second problem is the introduction of rules preventing the first day of Tishri from falling on certain days in the week, and the reason is to avoid the Day of Atonement from occurring next to a Sabbath. So, Tishri 1 may fall on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Sabbath. The third problem is the fixing of the lengths of the months, so that they do not vary with the moon, whereas using first visibility criteria, every month may have either 29 or 30 days. The fourth problem is the year length used by the Rabbinic calendar has a small inaccuracy, which after 1,660 years has accumulated to more than 7 days. This error misplaces the end of winter and the beginning of spring, starting at the equinox, by 7 days or more, and results in the premature intercalation of the 13th month in 25% of all years. According to Dr. Irv Bromberg, a professor at the University of Toronto, the Rabbinic calendar drifts off course another whole day every 224 years. Since its beginning, there have been 1,660 years, so the drift has accumulated to 7.4 days. According to my calculation, therefore, about 5,000 years from now, the Rabbinic calendar will always be a month late, and 100% of the feast days will be incorrect. At present, all of the other factors add up. From the year 2000 through 2020, there are 21 years, and in them 147 annual Sabbaths. Between the current Rabbinical calendar and the Biblical calendar, there are only 20 agreements on dates, all of 2004 and 2020, and only the spring dates in 2012 and 2014. This means the two calendars agree only 14% of the time. That means the Rabbinical calendar is biblically incorrect 86% of the time. That's a real mess up. So, we do not have to wait 5,000 years for the Rabbinical calendar to be mostly wrong. It already is. What I would like to do is start with the last part of the tradition that I regard as correct, just before the implementation of the Rabbinic calendar, and then show that this tradition, in fact, accurately expresses the biblical rules for the calendar. Dr. Irv Bromberg cites the rule for us. I quote, "The Talmud Baveli Tractate Rosh Hashanah 21a says, Rav Huna bar Avin sent the following message to Rava. When you see that the winter season is stretching until the 16th of Nisan, intercalate a month into that year, and don't worry about it. For it is written, guard the month of spring. Guard the spring season so that it will be in the month of Nisan." An alternative version of the Talmud Baveli Tractate Rosh Hashanah was discovered in the Cairo Geniza, with the message of Rav Huna, addressed to Rava, and explicitly in the commentary of Rabbeinu Hanael, it says that the criterion for intercalation was to insert a leap month if otherwise the equinox moment would land on or beyond 16 days after the molad, referring to the observational Hebrew calendar. However, Rambam wrote, when the court calculates and determines that the spring equinox will fall on the 16th of Nisan or later, the year is made a leap year. The month that would have been Nisan is made Adar Sheni, so that Pesach will be in the spring. This factor alone is sufficient for the court to make a year a leap year, and other factors need not be considered. Hilkot Kiddush HaHodesh, Chapter 4, Paragraph 2. In other words, Rambam's limit for the latest equinox was the end of the 15th day of Nisan, exactly halfway through the month. End quote. Sunset on Nisan 15 marks the end of the annual Sabbath and the beginning of Nisan 16 in terms of the sunset to sunset reckoning of a day. According to the rule, if the equinox falls on any part of a day, then the whole day is regarded as the first day of the year. This inclusive reckoning is implied by the commandment not to delay the offering of the first fruits. and the law of mercy. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. This instruction requires us to count the year from the day of the equinox moment, rather than the day after the equinox moment. This is important in the few cases when the equinox falls on the 15th day of the first month. Huna's ruling agrees with Scripture. The Scripture says that 3 feasts are to be celebrated in a year. Therefore, the first day of unleavened bread may not occur before the year begins. That is, the latest the precise moment of the equinox may be is just before sunset on the 15th day. So, what is the scriptural basis for this? The rule that the first day of the feast must occur in the new year is found in Exodus 13:7-10, which I quote, "Unleavened bread you will eat 7 days, and no leavened product shall be seen among you, and no leavening shall be seen in all your borders. And you will have declared to your son on that day, saying, Because Yahweh had done this for me during my going out from Egypt, and it will have been a sign for you upon your hand, and a memorial between your eyes, that the Torah of Yahweh will be in your mouth, because with a mighty hand Yahweh has brought you out from Egypt. And you will have kept this statute at its set time, from days unto days." End quote. Days unto days is a Hebrew idiom for the days of the solar year. Days, in the plural, is the idiom for the 365 or 366 days of a year. Therefore, the first day of the feast must be after the 365th day, or in the case of a leap year, after the 366th day. The first day of the feast must be on or after the beginning day of the new year. Logic demands this interpretation. If the first day of the feast falls before the year begins, then there will be 4 feasts in the last year, breaking the command to have 3 feasts in a year. Even the Emperor Constantine was able to employ this logic in his Easter letter. He accused the Jews of celebrating Passover twice in the same year. But in all likelihood, the bishops at the Council of Nicea were incorrect about the exact definition of the year in Scripture, and the ecclesiastical full moon rule, given by the Council, is the Church's way of concealing the fact that intercalation takes place in relation to the first day of unleavened bread. What is to prevent the first day of the feast from falling more than 30 days after the beginning of the year? In such a case, the 15th day of the previous month would in reality be the first month of the year. What prevents this kind of delay is the command to offer the first of the first fruits, and the command not to consume any part of the new crop until the offering is made. Leviticus 23:14 states, "And bread or roasted grain, even fresh production, you shall not eat until the bone of this day, until you are bringing the drawing near offering for your Almighty, a statute forever throughout your generations, in all your dwellings." Exodus 34:26 says, just after specifying 3 feasts are to be in a year, "The first of the firstfruits of your land you shall bring to the house of Yahweh your Almighty." And Exodus 22:29 states, "The fruition of your crop and your juices you shall not delay." In like manner, just after stating 3 feasts must occur in a year, Exodus 23:19 says, "The first of the firstfruits of your land you shall bring to the house of Yahweh your Almighty." In order to keep this precept, it is necessary to make sure the year is not intercalated late. From the standpoint of ancient Israel, delaying the first month past the earliest opportunity to have the first day of the feast in the new year would create hardship and suffering for the poorer classes, since they depended on the new supply of grain. And even if Israel were blessed, the supply of grain for the foreign market would be delayed. So we see that the rules of the calendar are not just rooted in cold calculations. They are also connected to human need. I have explained that the great circuit of the days occurs at the end of days. The ends, katsot, in Scripture are numbered at 4 and are connected to the 4 winds and the 4 ends of the heavens. These are the 4 cardinal directions: east, west, north, and south. The return of the year is in the spring, when kings go out to battle. Therefore, the day in which the sun rises east and sets west is the beginning day of the year. Psalm 19:6 says, "From the end of the heavens is the sun's going forth, and its circuit is unto their ends." The sun never rises or sets at the cardinal points of north or south. The only time it rises and sets at the cardinal points is on the equinoxes. At the beginning of the year, the sun rises east and sets in the west, and its circuit for the year, a completion of days, takes it back to the east and west cardinal points after 365 or 366 days. Then the days begin to repeat their characters. So, the tradition recorded in the Talmud and aspired to in the Rabbinic calendar is in fact the scriptural teaching, insofar as the rule is that the 16th day of the first month must be entirely after the equinox. If it wasn't, then more than 3 prescribed feasts would fall in a year, or the first of the first fruits would be delayed, or they might even go by. Rabbi Huna's summary of the rule is completely sufficient if we apply it to the biblical definition of the new moon and year. The rule states when to add the 13th month. If and only if the 16th day of the month after the 12th month is partly in the old year. So long as a month is not added for any other reason, the year will be properly intercalated. In practice, in ancient Israel, observers kept track the day on which the sun rose in the exact east or set in the exact west, as the days were growing longer. When this occurred, they began counting days to 365. They also knew that almost every 4 years it took 366 days. Sometimes the observers might be a day off on the exact going forth day of the sun. But this error rate is not new. Observers could also be a day off in seeing the first visible new moon. The sun is easiest to observe near the return of the year, changing its setting point each day by a whole solar diameter, a half a degree. First, the observers determined where the cardinal points east and west lay on the horizon. This is best done on the day of the summer or winter solstice. The sun's rising point, the observer's standing point, and the sun's setting point form an angle with the observer at the vertex. Stretch a cord of equal length along the rays of the angle toward the sunrise and the sunset. Set up 2 stones at the end of the cord, marking 2 points on the rays toward the sunrise and the sunset. A line passing over these 2 stones is a true east and west line. The ends of the line will point east and west exactly. If one stands behind one stone, the sun will set at the return of the year over the other stone. What is the distance required for accuracy? A cord with a radius of 200 feet makes a circle with a circumference of 1,257 feet. In a circle, there are 360 degrees and 720 half degrees. So at the end of 200 feet, the sun will take up about 21 inches. Replacing the one stone with 2, spaced about this far apart, will allow the observer to see the sun's disk framed between the pillars at the return of the year. For the best observations, one would seek a flat and elevated site. Ancient observers tended to accept their results as affected by a depressed horizon due to elevation and as affected by atmospheric refraction. As a result, the year often began on a day before a strict geometric calculation. It may be difficult to tell which of 2 days is the beginning day if the sun appears to be halfway into the space on one day and halfway out of it on the next. Sighting the new moon is attended by similar difficulties in cases of marginal potential for visibility. Intercalation was performed by waiting until the 13th new moon, counting from the previous spring, counting from the first month whose 15th day was on or after the return of the year. If the 13th new moon day fell before the 352nd day of the year, then it would have to be the 13th month. If the 13th new moon fell after the 352nd day, then it would certainly be the first month. And if the new moon landed on the 352nd day, and sometimes it will, then it is the first month if the year will have 365 days, but the 13th month if the year will have 366 days. If a leap year of 366 days was recently used, then 365 days was assumed. If 3 years had gone by with 365 days, then 366 days was assumed. As pointed out in an earlier video, Deuteronomy 16:1 says, "Observe the month of the fresh grain ear." This means to observe the new moon with this name. It does not say to observe the fresh grain ear. It says observe the new moon, if Hodesh is taken to mean new moon and not month. The object of the verb is the new moon, with the name fresh grain ear, Aviv. The direct object is not the fresh grain ear. The name of the month does not fix a method of determining when it is any more than similar names were a means of fixing other months. Some believe that the first month must always have its new moon day on or after the spring equinox. There is no biblical statement of such a rule. The rule is given in Exodus 13:1 through 10, where the first day of the feast must be from days to days. The biblical rule is entirely in harmony with that received from Jewish tradition, and indeed agrees better with even the Christian tradition or Easter, since the Church also often calculates its first ecclesiastical new moon before the spring equinox. It is true that the late Babylonian method was always to take the new moon on or after the spring equinox as the first month. But the Jewish community has long employed the Hebrew version of some Babylonian month names for their own months, regardless of when and how the Babylonians intercalated the year. The only time that we may have to suppose the Babylonian method was ever used at variance with the scripture or biblical method is in a context outside the land of Israel. And there is only one date possibly at variance, and that is Nehemiah 2:1 in the court at Shushan. If so, when he arrived in Judea, he would have found that the Judean calendar was 1 month ahead of that back in Persia in the spring of 445 BC. In those days, it was common for a traveler going from one nation to another to have to adjust their calendar upon arrival when the same month names were used. In more recent times, when the Julian and Gregorian calendar were both used in different countries, travelers had to adjust their dates. The biblical method I have explained here is in accord with the key historical dates: the Exodus year in 1632 BC, Messiah's birth year in 2 BC, and the crucifixion year in AD 34. In all these years, we can pin down how the year was intercalated by independent means. In each of these 3 cases, the new moon of the first month was before the spring equinox. The new moon day for the first month may be up to 14 days before the spring equinox. It may also fall up to 15 days after the spring equinox day. If the first month is placed later, it is too late. Thank you for listening. And be sure to support this ministry by visiting worldwideweb TorahTimes.org. There you will find my books and publications.